Hello, welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we have a wonderful guest with us. We have Dr. Nate Regier, who is the CEO and founding owner of Next Element Consulting. They are a global leadership firm that is dedicated to bringing compassion into the workplace. And he's written in multiple books. And I'm just really excited to have him here. There is so much to talk about. As I was going through his books, I was thinking, my goodness, where do we begin? And especially right now, the climate that we're in our society, certainly compassion in the workplace is important. I know we're also going to talk about leveraging personality diversity. So, I mean, you don't get much more timely than that. And so we're just really excited to have him here. Dr. Nate, welcome to Leaders Transformation.
Nicole, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you and with your audience today.
Awesome. Well, I want to do a shout out before we forget to Sarah at Weaving Influence, because she is the one that helped make this connection. And I always give acknowledgement where there are people that refer guests to us. So I always do that because I want to acknowledge the people that support our show. That also is our listeners and our viewers. And so we want to thank you for being here, because you're the reason why we do this show. And we appreciate you supporting it. And if you like this episode, please share it with a friend. If you know there's someone that is maybe looking to restructure their company and needs a little bit more compassion in the workplace, I think this is going to be very relevant. If they need to be looking at personality diversity, as we're going to be talking about here, then please share it. And also, I want to just put one more thing in there, is ratings and reviews really do make a difference in us being able to reach a larger audience. And so, again, if you like this, please leave us a rating and review. We also want to hear your comments, what you like about it, and what it was most meaningful to you, so that we can continue to develop content which is valuable and relevant to you. So with that, we appreciate that. Now, Nate, let's talk about, I briefly just gave them a 3-second view of who you are. There's so much, as I said, to you and your expertise. So tell us a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you're passionate about.
Oh, I'd love to. And I want to echo your shout out to Sarah and the team at Weaving Influence. They're phenomenal. And it's why we're connected. And any other authors out there that want a wonderful team to work with, to build these relationships and to get an opportunity to share and talk with thought leaders in the world. It's just Weaving Influence. I can't say enough great things about them. Well, I call myself a recovering psychologist, and I trained in clinical psychology and practiced for 11 years before starting my own company. I grew up the son of missionary parents in Africa, and so I am no stranger to conflict. I'm no stranger to diversity, and no stranger to the power of compassion to transform lives. And so it's been my quest professionally to figure out how to operationalize and scale compassion within companies, because it's not just a touchy-feely nice thing to have. It is critical to business success. Is critical for an increasingly connected world where relationships are at the root, at the core of everything. So it's been my passion, and personality diversity is just one of the areas where I'm really interested, and I think there's a lot we can learn there.
Absolutely. So talk to us about personality diversity. What is it, and how do you apply it, if you will?
Mm-hmm. Well, personality diversity is this idea that people differ with regard to personality, just like they do on a lot of other dimensions, like gender, race, ethnicity, and that it is a very important and powerful driver of behavior. And I used to think personality was just like, oh, just preferences we have. I mean, everybody has a personality, whatever. And I learned all the old style clinical types of things. But when I was introduced to the model that is the basis of my book, it completely blew my mind and opened my mind to, wow, personality drives a lot more than just preferences and temperament. It is a powerful driver of behavior and style that we never knew. I remember the first time I ever presented, like put out there to public this idea that maybe personality diversity is worth paying attention to, I submitted to present it at a SHRM, Society for Human Resource, their U.S. National Conference on Diversity. And I got accepted to present on this topic. And I thought, well, I don't know if anybody's going to show up. And the room was packed with diversity and inclusion officers. And this was 2013. So 7 years ago, it was just starting to come, the word inclusion wasn't even being used. And I presented on this topic. And afterwards, I was just swamped with people coming up and saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea personality was so important. And I hadn't even thought of it as a really important thing to pay attention to. So that was kind of that was all I needed to say, I'm going for this. I'm really going to try to elevate this conversation.
Awesome. Well, I teach personality dynamics, and I never really thought about it as diversity or inclusion, but as I started to hear those words described and defined more often, what I realized is like, yeah, that's what I've been teaching a lot now, focusing more on the personality, the diversity in personality. But there's so many different ways that we're diverse, but recognizing this uniqueness that we bring. And this certainly ties in with compassion in the workplace in terms of appreciating the differences and what people bring to the table. So really, really good. Now, your book, Seeing People Through, Unleash Your Leadership Potential with the Process Communication Model. I read it. It's excellent. That's why I said there's so much that we could talk about and unpack in that book. I just recommend our listeners would go get a copy of the book, Seeing People Through. We'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to get that. But talk about this process communication model, which is the foundation to what you teach. What is it? You know, give us a little bit of a sense of what is it and how it works.
Well, I'll call it PCM for short, so we can get on with the important stuff. PCM was a framework for individual differences in communication that was actually discovered and developed in the 1970s by a psychologist by the name of Dr. Taby Kaler. And he was very interested in how individual differences manifest through communication. Because, I've always felt like individual differences don't matter unless two or more people are trying to get something done. And then it really matters, but it matters in as much as how we talk to each other. So this model is not about what we say, but how we say it that often makes all the difference. And it turns out that personality strongly influences the how of communication, or the process of it, which is why it's called the process communication model. And interesting thing about PCM, the first place it was really put to work was at NASA to select and train astronauts for the space shuttle program, because it was so incredibly predictive of behavior, but also it gave behavioral interventions that the astronauts could use with each other to try to stay healthy and stay energized. So it's a model of communication that teaches people how to actually talk to each other through personality differences. And how it conceptualizes diversity is that it talks about there's 6 types that this model identifies, but they're all within each of us. So it's a model about types in people, not types of people. And that is a game changer when we start thinking about the concept of inclusion.
So when I was going through the book and I was learning about this model, and of course I was looking at myself and saying, okay, well, where do I fit into this? And, and who, like the people that I know, where do they fit into this? And how does this all work? And, it's pretty fascinating. To me, I find personality dynamics fascinating because we're all so different, and we bring, like I said, I come back to that value. We bring such value and perspective to the conversation. Now, obviously they can do an assessment, to be able to understand where they're at, but is there a way of getting them, rather than having to be fully trained and certified to teach this kind of thing, is there a way to get us up to speed quickly, even here today, with some ideas on how things that we can apply right now, from the model itself?
Yeah, there is. And yes, there is an assessment where you can get your own personality structure, and there's all kinds of trainings to learn how to actually talk to different types and how to motivate them and everything. But I could just give you a really brief overview of the 6 types and what are the most observable behaviors that we can be
Sure.
watching for. Now, I mentioned that we have all 6 types in us. Now, they are arranged in a preferred set order. So the most prevalent type is called our base floor. It's kind of like a 6-story office building. And the base floor really strongly influences our style of communication. The thinker base personality type communicates a lot through this currency of what we call logic, where things really need to make rational, logical, orderly sense. So they use a lot of language around issues like data, time frames, questions around information, because they're trying to synthesize and make sense of stuff. The persister-based personality type really is more about values, and so they share a lot of opinions. So they're constantly they're judging and sizing up the world all the time, trying to figure out how does this fit with what is important to me and how I think things should be. So they share a lot of opinions, a lot of judgments about things. We see a lot of that coming out right now because people have a lot of opinions about what's going on. Another type is called the rebel based personality type. The rebel is much more playful and spontaneous, and they engage with the world through much more humorous reactions. So you're going to see them wearing their heart on their sleeve. They love to have a good time, and they're a lot more, maybe not as much of a filter on how they speak as the other types. And then there's the harmonizer based personality type. This is actually the largest in the population. 30% of the population has this as their strongest type. They're the compassionate, sensitive, and warm ones that speak in the language of feelings and want to talk about relationships and want to make a personal connection with people and really want people to know that they are valued and they exude this warmth. And that's how they see the world. Then there's the promoter personality type. That's my base personality type. It's shared by 5% of the population. Their language is much more action oriented. They want to get to the chase. They want to be moving all the time. And so you hear a lot more verbs in how they speak. Let's do it. Let's cut to the chase. What's the bottom line? Let's get moving. Are we going to talk about it all day? Or are we going to get on with this interview? And then the last one is imaginer. And the imaginer personality type is often called the introvert because they're much more reflective. They don't speak a lot, not a lot of facial expressions, and they much more prefer to be alone, to be energized. And so these 6 types are in all of us. They all are like energies that we can channel, but one of them is definitely preferred for each person, and it's detectable through observable body language.
Well, I know where I fit it based on that. I'm like, okay, let's do this.
Yep, let's go.
That would be me.
We could turn a 40-minute interview into about 8 minutes with just the key points and off we go, right?
Right. And my cat who has just arrived, he would be the harmonizer. So let's talk about all this and let's hang out. So, so he'll just show up.
Well, they want to
Sometimes
be
I
included.
stand in my podcast, but I've been standing all day, and so I decided to sit. And he's like, "Ooh, perfect!" So I get to a lap that I get to join. So yeah, that's just the way it is. One of the things that I really was interested in. So I've done a lot of the different assessment tools and so forth. What struck me as unique in this one was the change. So talk about that, where it can actually, you mentioned about the base, but then you can actually shift. So we all have all of these different aspects in us. Some are more, some less, but there's a change that happens. And you talk about that transition, the stage of life. And I think there's a lot of us that go through that stage and then wonder, well, who am I now? Because I don't seem to be operating or thinking the same way that the way that I used to do things isn't doing it for me now. Right. Or maybe it's confusing even to other people that are working with us. They're kind of like, they put you in a box and they say, okay, here's who you are. And now you're trying to be this other person. See? So.
Well, this is incredibly important. I'm glad you brought it up because this is really fundamental to authenticity and to transformational leadership, is understanding who we are and how we tick. And so even though we have all 6 of these types in us, one of those 6 corresponds to our current psychological needs and motivators, which is, what do we really need to be energized? What do we value right now the most? And what kind of fuel do we need to be able to show up every day? And it can be really anywhere within our condominium. And for all of us, when we're born, our motivational needs are aligned with our base floor. But for 2/3 of the population, those needs change sometime during our life. And it's really about an interplay between the environment and what we're going through, and maybe what happened when we were in childhood, maybe sometimes a significant event in our life. But it explains why people can have the same personality, but they can change. And this is the only model that I know of that accounts for both of those dynamics at the same time. So some people might take a particular personality profile, then they take it again 5 years later and it changes. And it's like, well, personality doesn't change. So why did my results change? Well, it may be that this assessment is not picking up on what's really going on, which is your structure stayed the same, but your psychological needs and motivators have changed. And so when we work with leaders, it's really critical to find out what is most important to you now. And if you've been through a change, how does that impact everything from your routines to your relationships to how you and your wife negotiate staying healthy? So it's very significant, and it was really helpful in clinical work, but really helpful in the work I do around transformational leadership and coaching. Did that
Well, and
answer your question about that?
absolutely, yes, it
Okay.
did. And this is the interesting thing, is like right now, as we're still going through it, but COVID, we went through COVID and then it kind of got better and it got worse. We're we're kind of still in that space right now. This
Mhm.
is the new year, in 2021. And so if you're listening to this a few years later, you'll know the outcome of
Mhm.
everything that happened. Yay. But right now we're in it. And I think there's a lot of I know there's a lot of people pivoting. There's a lot of people that are very uncertain, feeling very uncertain right now. And so
Yeah.
that's why I
Yep.
think this is really relevant to understand, who are they? What are their needs? How are their
Yep.
needs getting met? And you made a point about personality assessments that change. It does skew the responses when you answer the question. Like, if I'm in a place of a deep struggle and challenge, or I'm not getting certain needs met, or certain things are happening in my life that are impacting me, I'm going to certainly respond differently to certain questions. Am I more like this, or am I less like that, kind of thing? And so, um, and this comes back to compassion, right? So, as a leader, how do we support our people as they are evolving and changing through
Yep.
these different needs? And I think there's a lot of leaders right now are trying to figure out, how do we support our people? And that's why I mentioned, like with
Yeah.
COVID, it's like there's different stages. It's not like COVID, all the
Hmm.
same. There are different stages of grief and recovery and all of that. So how do you work with leaders to be able to, they're going through
Yep.
themselves and they're also helping their people through
Yep.
it?
That is such a good question. And just earlier today, where we do weekly free webinars for leaders, like 30-minute just micro courses. And one of the issues we've been talking about is, how is excuse me, how is personality being affected by this long haul of COVID fatigue? And how is the dynamics that COVID is presenting, how is it impacting our ability to get our needs met in healthy ways? Because one of the things we know about personality is that if we don't get our needs met in healthy ways, we'll attempt to get those same needs met negatively, with or without awareness. So I could be going through a deep, dark time and be in distress. That doesn't change my personality, but the PCM assessment would pick up on it and say, your personality it hasn't changed, but you're in distress and you're not getting your needs met in a healthy way. So in working with leaders, to your two topics, one of them is appreciating leaders to really appreciate for themselves and the people they lead, how are the current conditions impacting a person's personality, specifically their ability to leverage their strengths and to get their needs met in a healthy way. And then the third really important one is there are certain emotional issues that get triggered by these kinds of things that hit certain personality types differently. And if we're not aware of that, we can get triggered and all of a sudden find ourselves in a tailspin and have no idea why. So then the leader also needs to know what's going on with me. How am I handling all this? How am I taking care of myself so I can show up? Because that 6th floor building has an elevator, and unless I'm taking care of me, that elevator ain't working. And if the elevator isn't working, I can't connect with everybody else. So there's just a lot there that's really important. We created a leadership profile for the PCM that goes specifically to leaders about what's going on here. What do you need to know about taking care of yourself before you can help anybody else?
I feel like there are probably a lot of leaders who are in overwhelm, just thinking,
Yep.
oh my goodness, I got enough to deal with myself. I've got my family, I've got people
Yeah.
to lead. And now they're changing is to, their
Mm-hmm.
needs are changing too.
Yep.
That's also for customers. Customer needs are changing,
Yes.
vendors, the way that they're operating, everybody's, there's so much flux in
Mm-hmm.
here. So, um, I love that you're breaking it down for them and just giving them a tool so that they can move forward. Let's shift gears and let's talk about this idea of compassion in the workplace. So how do we bring, with all of this being said, how do we bring more compassion in the workplace?
Well, let's talk about what compassion is and what it isn't first. A lot of people think compassion is empathy, kindness. My heart goes out to you. Um, I want to help you. I want to alleviate your suffering, or I just really care about what you're going through. And that's traditional. That's great, but that's barely scratching the surface of what compassion is. If you look at the Latin root of the word compassion, it means with suffering. It means to suffer with somebody, not to take away their suffering, not to um, suffer for them. It means to suffer with them. And so this really intersects with inclusion then, is what it means to have compassion is to say, we really are in this together. So we're going to struggle alongside each other in a spirit of dignity to create something amazing. We're going to use our conflict, use our suffering, use this diversity and adversity as fuel to create something amazing. So compassion is not just a feeling, it is a process for leveraging the energy of conflict to turn it into something amazing. And that's why we are so excited about it, because it's the mechanism to turn all of this junk into something incredible. It's not just empathy. And so we spend a lot of effort trying to operationalize that and say, what does that actually look like? How do you actually do that behaviorally? But that's kind of the background.
Well, and how do you, like you were saying, is how do you make something amazing out of it, create something amazing out of it? So is this one thing we can all sit here and go, wow, this is really,
Mhm.
we're suffering, as you say, together. But then there's, of course, maybe it's the promoter in me is saying, okay, now what? What are we going to
Now what?
do
So what are we gonna do
about
about it?
this? And so how do we create lasting
Yep.
change, and how do we turn it into something good? That's the transformation. The
Yep.
leaders of transformation is, they're leaders that are leading the transformation, that are, at the forefront
Yep.
of these and I talk about transformation. I talk about transforming the way people see themselves, others, and the world around them. So if we can transform those things, which has to do with belief systems, behaviors, habits,
Yep.
beliefs we have about ourselves, beliefs we have about others, and the beliefs that we have about the world that we live
Yep.
in. And so we can create those kinds of changes. Now you talk about in your last book, so we seeing people through, and then you had conflict without casualties. How do you have conflict without casualties? This would probably be relevant for us to know how to do that right now, as there's a lot of conflict going on.
Yep. Yep.
So compassion is on
Well,
one side, and then you've got
yep.
conflict on the other side. How do you deal with that?
First thing we have to do is adopt a compassion mindset. And a compassion mindset is a specific attitude towards ourselves and other people, like you mentioned. And there's some important areas around how we have to adjust the way we look at each other. And so we teach the compassion mindset basically has 3 switches. It's about human value, human capability, and human responsibility. And those 3 all have to be switched on in order for us to truly manifest compassion. And so I have to believe and acknowledge that you and I are valuable. I have to acknowledge that you and I are capable. And I have to acknowledge that you and I are responsible for our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, not for each other's, not for anyone else's, but for our own. And so when those 3 switches are on, it enables us to start engaging difficult stuff in a completely different way. I think the biggest challenge right now is we are all vulnerable, but nobody wants to admit it. Everybody wants to be strong or wants to have it figured out. And so the biggest thing a leader can do to have conflict without casualties is equal the playing field by showing your cards, dropping your guard, and letting people know how you're really doing and how you're really struggling. Because contrary to what you might believe, that actually increases your credibility, increases your connection, and increases your influence. And so that's step 1 for having conflict without casualties, is show people you don't want to hurt them by getting vulnerable.
You know, this brings up a good point. I was going to ask you, leaders, a lot of times the onus is on the leaders. You know, if something's not happening, not working within the organization, it's the leader's fault, right? But you mentioned a word there. One of my favorite words is responsibility, and taking ownership for our own behaviors, our own actions, our own beliefs and perceptions. And so, you know, if you look at, like I said, it's almost like people like to blame one or the other, right? It's their fault. They're developing culture, you know, a poor culture. So my question is, I guess, who is really responsible for culture within an organization?
I think we all are, except ultimately it is the top leader. Ultimately, it goes downhill. And being responsible for something doesn't mean you're the one that does it all. It means that you are accountable for it happening. So a great example, just a very simple home example right now. My youngest daughter, it's one of her jobs every day to clean the kitchen, load, unload the dishwasher. At least once a day, the kitchen has to be clean. We don't care when, at least once a day. So let's say I've had a really stressful day and I like my structure. And if I haven't felt productive during the day, then every little mess is going to get on my nerves when I get home. I get home, kitchen's a mess. So the question is, am I going to be responsible for my feelings, for my behaviors throughout the day, or am I going to try to put them off on her and say, hey, how come the kitchen's not clean? What's going on here? And I get all freaking out because I'm not taking responsibility for what I want. Now, I could also just go clean the kitchen so I can feel better, but then I'm not letting her take responsibility for her job. If I really want to be 100% responsible for myself, what I do is I go to my daughter and say, I wasn't productive today and I'm extra sensitive to messiness. That's on me. I want the kitchen clean before supper. Are you willing to do it?
I like that.
Because
Yeah,
I
what a
want the
great
kitchen to be clean
example.
so I can feel better, but it's your job. So that means I got to say something to you. So if I just expect you to clean and you don't do it and I get upset, I have shirked my responsibility for my own feelings, for my own behaviors, and the job didn't get done. And so ultimately, as the parent, I am accountable for that.
Well, we see this a lot, right? Leaders get frustrated with, I say leaders, managers, and there's a difference, but you know, people that have direct reports or people in their teams, and they say, uh, you know, this didn't get done, and they get upset about it, whether they say it directly to them or not, but they're frustrated with them.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
didn't get this done. Now, when they express it to the person, and we see that in relationships, personal relationships as well, you get angry at the other person, just like in that example you're talking about. Your daughter goes, what is his problem? He's getting on
Jeez
my
Louise,
case,
yeah. I'm
because we
gonna
see
do it.
things. Yeah, because we see things from our point of view. One of my mentors, he said, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And so we're like, what is wrong with him? And he's
Yeah.
always on my case. My boss is always on my case. How many times have we heard that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas in what you're describing is that it doesn't shirk the response, it doesn't relieve them of the responsibility or the accountability to do what they need to do, but they understand. And that's the vulnerability piece where you're actually saying, this is what this, how this makes me feel, and or this is how I am feeling right now, and I need you to do
Yeah.
this because of this. So you're just opening up yourself to them so that they're not actually, what I hear in that, and I guess that's why I want to unpack it for a second, is it's not so that they don't take it as personally anymore, because they know what's driving it. And if they
Well,
understand what's
I,
driving it,
yeah.
then you can build more compassion both ways, because the
Yeah.
next time it may be the other way around.
Well, your example's a great one. I'm frustrated because you didn't do what you're supposed to do. No, I'm not. I'm frustrated because I didn't get what I wanted. I'm frustrated because I had needs that I didn't tell you about. I wouldn't be frustrated if I didn't care. So I got to own my own care, my own motives, my own stuff. So it's actually a cover up to say I'm frustrated. What's really happened is I didn't get what I wanted, and there's things I wanted and implications that it has for me that I'm not telling you. Like, I'm up for promotion next week, and so if you don't perform, it looks bad on me. Or I set goals for myself this week to get this much done and it didn't happen, so I'm kicking myself. If we're not willing to be honest about our own motivations and the impact of others' behavior on our own feelings, we're not being honest with them. We're trying to make them the owners of our feelings. And I'll go one step further. When you said makes me feel, and then you said, no, I feel when, it it's when I say that made me feel, what I'm really saying is I don't want to be responsible for my feelings. I'm going to put them on you, but they're mine. I'm the one left to deal with them. I'm the one that have to own up to what I'm going to do about it.
Yes. I remember the first time somebody said to me, nobody makes you feel anything. You choose how you feel. And I thought, what are you talking
Wait,
about?
excuse
And then I
me?
started really, I started thinking it through, and I thought, wow, that is so true. Nobody makes me happy. Nobody makes me frustrated.
Yeah,
Nobody makes me sad or angry.
yeah,
I choose to feel those things because, and they stem from things that are going on from me. For me, what
yeah,
I didn't get my needs met, and there's the response that I'm getting. There's the meaning that
yeah,
I'm giving it, is that I'm interpreting it a
yeah.
certain way.
I'm trying to get too much done on my way to work, and I still want to go to Starbucks for a cup of coffee because that's my routine. And now there's 6 people in front of me in the line, and I'm frustrated because everybody in front of me is going too slow. But the father and the son behind me that are getting a latte before they go drive 100 miles together to go hunting are just having a grand old time right behind me. So clearly, those other people didn't make me mad. Clearly, it's me. The situation just is the situation, but it's all about me, why I'm angry and frustrated. And so when we take 100% ownership over our feelings and our choices, we become free. We're free.
So I come back to the diversity.
Yeah.
There's so many different people dynamics going on here. Do you find that some of the leaders you work with, obviously they come to you for a
Yeah.
reason to help them navigate these waters, but do you feel like, do they feel overwhelmed with all of this? I mean, it's like there's limitless possibilities, and you've got to be able to narrow it down
Yeah.
so that they can get a sense of where people are at.
Yes. And that's why this personality, learning about our personality is so important, because once I understand someone's personality, including my own, it's a very direct path to what's most helpful. There's no guessing, there's no messing around. It's really clear what I need to do to be healthy. It's clear what kinds of feelings I need to own, and it's clear what I do to sabotage myself and how to turn it around. No guesswork there. So that's where personality is so instructive on helping us cope and helping us be healthy.
Just before we wrap up, talk about diversity, inclusion, and innovation.
Yeah. Innovation requires all of the gifts that we have within us. It requires the analytical part of the thinker. It requires the imaginative, no structure dreaming of the imaginer. It requires that let's just try stuff and see what sticks, enthusiasm, creativity of the rebel. It requires the let's go implement this of the promoters. So within each of us, innovation magnifies when we can access these energies within us, but even more when we can include and leverage those energies in other people. The whole culture starts to become innovative because all of the strengths are coming to bear. And that's, we just see it just explode when people start to truly include and appreciate those types in themselves and in other people.
Yes. Well, and I think that's the competitive advantage that companies can have
Mhm.
over their, other companies. And I don't like to use the word competitors because it's such a win-lose concept there, but others in their industry, how they can set themselves apart, differentiate themselves
Yeah.
is by this bringing all of the strengths. I said years ago, imagine, and I thought at the time, like this maybe 10, 15 years ago, and I thought, imagine if everybody was able to play to their strengths. And I thought, oh, that's kind of Pollyanna. I mean, that's not going to happen, right? But imagine, seriously, like that's what you do, right? Is to help. How do you bring it to the point where everybody can be playing to their strengths? How much more resource, how much more creativity and ingenuity perspective that you get, and how much better the product, the service, the
Yeah.
culture will be when you bring in all of these different dynamics and these different colors of the spectrum, if you will.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And
That's why leadership is an art. The true artists know how to bring colors together to create something amazing. They know how to use shading and light and texture. And so they know how to leverage the gifts that each part of the palette brings to create something. That's the art. But they first have to really understand the mechanics of how the science behind how all this works. The greatest chefs don't use recipes, but they understand the principles, they understand the dynamics, they understand the chemical reactions, they know all of that, so they can then do their art. Um, and it's true. That's how we unlock the potential, unlock this amazing potential within people.
I love that analogy. That was awesome. The art and the science. And I've heard people talk about the art and science, but I haven't heard anybody actually describe it as the artist with the different color palettes because there's a limitless number of colors that you can bring to it. So what a perfect analogy for leadership. And with that, I think that's a great place to finish off. And for those of you that are listening as leaders, obviously it's a science and it's also an art. And so if you don't know how to do it well, or you're kind of finding yourself in a position where you're in uncharted waters, one of the biggest mistakes that I find leaders make is they think that they need to know it all and that they have to figure it out on their own. And so that's why we bring guests on this show that are masters in what they're doing, experts, that this is their business, so that they can give you a taste of what they do and give you a sense of that, so that you can unpack it a little bit further if it resonates. But to bring these tools to the table so that you can become a better leader. And I do believe that certainly in this country, but I think around the world, we need better leaders. And it's not just, yes, it is, as a leader, it is our responsibility to be great leaders, but it's not necessarily on us to figure it out all on our own. It's not on us to be able to have had all the answers, like to start out of the gate and know everything. That's just unrealistic. And so there's nothing wrong with asking. In fact, the greatest leaders that I've ever had on this show, that I've met over the years, have a lot of coaches and people that have guided them. And one of the things that is common to all of them is that they know that they don't know. The greatest leaders admit that the more they learn, the less they know, if you will. And they are willing to learn, they're willing to be subject to a new idea, subject to someone seeing blind spots in them. And so I don't know, I just want to encourage you, as we're going into this new year and this new season. There's so much, I mean, the leadership is now more than ever important. And so I encourage you to go get a copy of Nate's book, Seeing People Through, Unleash Your Leadership Potential with the Process Communication Model. Seeing People Through is their website, seeingpeoplethrough.com. And then, of course, there's nextelement.com, and that is their consulting website. You can also get a copy of his previous book, Conflict Without Casualties, which is an introduction to the concept of compassionate accountability. And so there is so much richness here, and training and equipping on the science of leadership and the art of leadership. And you owe it to yourself to become the best leader that you can possibly be. You owe it to your people to be the best leader that you can possibly be, because when you are a better leader and you are willing to be vulnerable with your people, then that gives them the room, the space to step up into leadership as well in their own lives and in the environments that they have. So I encourage you to do that. And just I want to finish off, Nate, any final thoughts before we end?
Yeah, I would say one of the best things I ever heard about models, this is called the process communication model, is the purpose of a good model is to change your mind, not to make it up. And right now in the climate we're in, everybody has made up their minds about each other, about what's going to happen. And we need frameworks and models and leaders that encourage us to change our mind and are willing to show that they can look at something differently and try something new. So whether it comes to inclusion or personality or compassion, it's really all about giving ourselves a chance to struggle together to create something amazing.
So good. Nate, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot today, and I'm re-inspired, and I'm also re-encouraged, because I know that people like yourself are out there teaching leadership at a level of high excellence. So again, thank you for being on the show. We appreciate you. It's just awesome. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks again.
And my pleasure. And it's fun just talking to you, because I know we
Yeah.
could probably talk for hours.
Oh, I know. Now
I
that
mean,
I know you're interested in personality science, that'll be so fun to visit more.
totally. I love it. I really do. It's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
fascinating to me. I remember when I was in one of my workshops, actually came up with this thing on the fly. I said, choose fascination over frustration, choose curiosity over
Yeah.
criticism. And if we were just to do that, and then I remember reading another book which talked about judgment and said, judge not, right? Like the Bible says, judge not lest you be judged. This book said, and it was the Course of Miracles, and it said, that's my cat making noise, sorry. It said, I will judge nothing that occurs today. And I remember closing the book up and thinking, that's all I read. And it was because I was starting to read, this segment. And I read that and I thought, if I just did that, that is life-changing right there.
Yeah.
And so, to not judge, like you said, to not make up your mind, but to change your mind, to open your mind to new possibilities is the key to it. So I
That
appreciate,
personality
yeah,
type, the persister that leads with opinions, they are hardwired to judge. They're hardwired to evaluate. But when they're healthy, they can discern. But when they're unhealthy, they are self-righteous and judgmental. And so we've seen a lot of persisters go off the deep end right now during COVID, because there's so many things that they can judge that are not lining up with their values. And that's really scary, because when someone is chosen to pass judgment and to decide that everyone that doesn't agree with me is wrong, things can get pretty scary pretty fast. But interesting little fun fact is that the first famous person to use this model was President Clinton. He was a student of PCM and was personally trained, and his whole team was personally trained by Dr. Kaler. And they used this model for psychodemography and speech training and communication training for Clinton. And the stories are
interesting.
amazing. Yeah, the stories behind the scenes of how President Bill Clinton used this model in his work and in his negotiations and in his public speaking are just incredible.
Well, it's interesting. Obama is another one. When I was listening to Obama's acceptance speech, and I thought, wow, he sounds like John F. Kennedy. He had that, there are certain styles and
Hmm.
communication
Yep.
styles that you learn and model. And so I can see that, yes, in
Yep.
Bill Clinton as well. Very charismatic. That's why we loved
Yep.
him, but he was able to navigate with that. That's really, really interesting. So
Yeah, Obama accessed about 3 or 4 floors in his personality and his acceptance speech, which is one of the reasons it was so compelling. But in his presidency, he spent most of his time in his thinker floor because that was his base floor and he was under stress a lot. And when we're under stress, we become very monolithic and we just access those go-to strengths. And he would get very frustrated because people wouldn't appreciate that he's trying to make a rational, data informed decision. And the judges would get critical of him because he would change his mind when the data changed, because judges don't change their mind ever, because a value is unchangeable. And so they would accuse him of being a flip flopper, and he would accuse them of being stupid. And that's how the miscommunication occurred. So, yeah, he wasn't near as charismatic like that when he became president because he was under stress. But it's just really fun to analyze and watch that happen.
totally.
Um,
And we are not going to go into current presidencies and
no, no,
or incumbents. We're not going to
not while
touch
the
that.
recording's playing.
No, that's right. We'll analyze that behind the
Yeah,
scenes because I don't
yeah,
even want to open up that can of worms. But yeah, it is. It is so fascinating to me. Human behavior is so fascinating, and it is worth studying. It is worth understanding ourselves and others better, so we can build better relationships and more effective
yeah,
teams,
yes,
and more effective families, and more connected families, more compassionate communities, and a more compassionate nation and world. So I'm all for it. Again, Nate, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. For our listeners and our viewers, thank you for being here. If you like this episode, again, please share it, leave us a rating and review, and let us know what you liked about it. What stood out for you? If you have questions, of course, you can submit them to us. You can submit them directly to Nate and his team. I'm sure we'll address it. Reach out to them if you're looking for some consulting for your company. And yeah, we just appreciate you being here. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.